between World War I and World War II. That is named as League of Nations. So today these topics we are going to discuss about these topics. Before the entering into the concept of League of Nations, we have to know about the consequences after the First World War. After the First World War and during the First World War, they have so many incidents happened in international political era. After the First World War, there is an important treaty happened. That is the Treaty of Versailles. It is the outcome of the First World War, and also the World War One, which was commenced from 28th July 1914 to 11th November of 1918. So after so many wars and incidents, the international leaders like Woodrow Wilson and others wanted to stop this World War I and tried to establish a peaceful manner between the international politics. So between the states and between the all the nations who has been participated in the First World War. So the most important thing is this Treaty of Versailles. It is a peace settlement between the nations who are involved in the First World War, and also there has many arrangements has been happened after the First World War with this concept of Treaty of Versailles peace settlement. So the treaty also recognized some fundamental principles of international law during to be observed by all the countries in the world. So the most important outcome of this Treaty of Versailles was the creation of League of Nations. So the League of Nations was the first international organization covering the whole world to be created in history. So this institution especially established for the maintenance of international peace between the nations. So here the Paris Peace Conference was formally opened on 18th January of 1919. The representatives of the most of the nations of the world attended the conference. The right of representation to that conference was not given to Germany, Austria, Hungary, Turkey, and Bulgaria. Of the leading allied powers, Great Britain was represented by Lloyd George, France by Clemenceau, the USA by President Woodrow Wilson. So, and Italy by Orlando. It was these big four that for several months made the principal decisions. Soon after, many discussions happened in this conference, and these leading delegates were all outstanding men with very difference in character. So the basis of peacemaking is the primary motto of this conference. On the basis of certain interests and events, the terms of peace treaty were formulated in this Paris Peace Conference. So in this conference, Woodrow Wilson has made a 14-point proposals or 14-point principles to be followed by all the member states in the world. So on the 8th January of 1919, Woodrow Wilson, the President of United States of America, announced his famous 14 points as the basis of the future peace settlement. So it was through these principles that he gave expression to his ideal of establishing a lasting peace among the war-scared nations of the world. Here we have the 14 points were, first one is open covenants of peace and openly arrived at. And second one is freedom of the seas. Third one is free international trade system. And fourth one is reduction of national armaments to the lowest point consistent with national safety. And the fifth one is a just colonial policy. And sixth one is evacuation of Russian territory and leaving Russia free to determine its political development. And seventh one is evacuation and restoration of Belgium territories. And eighth one is evacuation of invaded French territory and restoration of Alsace and Lorraine to France. And ninth one is readjustment of frontiers of Italy on the basis of nationalism. And 10th one is autonomous development of the peoples of Austria-Hungary. And 11th one is foreign troops to be withdrawn from Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro. And 12th one is the sovereign rights of Turkish Sultan be restored. And 13th principle is an independent Poland with a free and secure access to the sea. And last one is a general association of nations shall be established. This is the important outcome of this 14-point principles made by Woodrow Wilson. The 14th principle is to be established international organization for peacemaking between the all the member states in the world. So that was the one of the major important outcome of this 14-point principles. So after the establishment of the League of Nations up to the 1939, there are so many incidents happened and so many war situations also happened. These institutions, the League of Nations, has been stopped that countries to do not participate in the war and do not encourage for the war conditions among the nations. So one of the main provisions of Treaty of Versailles also, the Treaty of Versailles has containing 440 articles, and almost many provisions also may be discussed in this Treaty of Versailles. Majorly during the First World War, there are crucial situations also happened between the developed and underdeveloped nations. The League of Nations is there for the protection of needy and poor countries for their rights and opportunities between the nations. And also the Treaty of Versailles has established a separate economic provisions to keep economically weak countries to be strong in international political scenario. At that time, Germany was compelled to accept war guilt, that is to acknowledge responsibility for causing the world war. Hence, a huge identity was imposed upon her by a way of financial reparation for all damage done to the civilian population of the Allies and their property. So in this treaty, there are many provisions like military provisions also there. There are legal provisions also there, and also there are political provisions also there. So majorly the treaty provided for the creation of the League of Nations with the primary object of maintaining international peace and security. It also provided for International Labour Organization. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk concluded between Germany and Russia, as well as other treaties concluded before the war were abrogated. Germany had to withdraw her army in the east within her few frontiers, and also the independence of Belgium, independence of Poland, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia was recognized after this treaty. And also the critical estimate of the treaty has been described as one of the important and most controversial charters of modern times, because the German described it as a dictated peace, a treaty forced upon the vanquished by the victor, and unheard of robbery of the German people, and as a big theft. Such attitude of Germans towards the Treaty of Versailles cannot be altogether overlooked. Throughout the conference of the German representatives were not consulted even once. So the German objections to the various clauses of the treaty were completely overruled. And also, at that time, there are many treaties with other central powers also placed during the First World War and Second World War. After the conclusion of First World War, the Treaty of Saint Germain in 1919 was placed in to maintain a peaceful relations between the Allied powers and other powers. So this treaty was made between Austria, Hungary, and Allies. So Austria recognized as a complete independence of Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Yugoslavia. And also there is a Treaty of Trianon in 1920. This treaty also made between Hungary and Allies, but this treaty, Hungary was separated from Austria, and also many situations happened between the Romania, Croatia, and Slovakia went to Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia, other states also participated to become as independent nations. So the Hungarian army was reduced to 35,000 army men, and Hungary was compelled to pay war reparation. So many situations also happened there. At that time, the important incident happened in this period, that was the Great Economic Depression. So the problem of reparation of war debts, a very important consequences of the Treaty of Versailles has in intercourse and has in course of time paved the way for a terrible economic depression which infiltrated the whole world for about a decade after 1929. So an economic depression is a situation where the economic conditions of a country suffered from decline in profits to the procedures and producers of goods, closure of factories and trade, growing unemployment, and further decline in production. So this depression of 1929 to 1931 was so bad, leading to closure of industries and exceptional unemployment, that millions of people in America and Europe became very poor. The normal flow of commerce was almost completely interrupted. Unemployment figures rose everywhere by leaps and bounds. Half Europe was bankrupt and other half threatened with bankruptcy. So this depression was regarded not as a passing phase, but as an indication of the general breakdown of the capitalist system throughout the world. So the world in mid-20s had some reaction, and there are some reason for hopefulness. So the Dawes Plan, which partly solved Germany's reparation problem, held out for promise of economic stability, while the Locarno treaties seemed to be assure political stability. So the League of Nations appeared growing in prestige and influence. Therefore, it seemed then that a united, peaceful, and prosperous world could be hoped for confidently. So if we discuss about this nature of economic depression at that time, there are many situations happened about world trade system and imports exports system, and the crash of 1919, and also there are many causes also there for this economic crisis in international politics. So economics of different countries differ about the causes of this economic crisis. However, we can identify certain factors that directly and indirectly contributed to the economic breakdown of several countries during interwar period. So economic crisis was a natural result of the situation created by the First World War. So rapid industrialization normally takes place during a war to meet the requirements of the defense and the defense needs and the armed forces. After the war, demand declines, problems of economic depression come onto the surface. And also the problems of reparation and interally debts were of a serious nature. No such problem had arisen after any other war. So these problems are very unique and different from normal post-war issues. So this entire economic life of the world was disturbed, especially due to the huge amounts of reparation that was imposed on the defeated nations like Germany. So after the First World War, most of the European nations remained directly and indirectly as debtors of the United States of America. So the debtor states began to pay their debts to America in gold. Thus, gold started to flowing in large quantities to the United States. And also, with the scarcity of this type of gold, the agriculture of Western Europe suffered and prices of wheat unexpectedly fell down. So the agriculture production in Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, etc. increased in excess of the domestic needs due to the mechanization of agriculture. So as a result, the prices of the agriculture products unexpectedly fell and the agriculture countries suffered most at this time. So during the war, manpower was needed for the army forces and also for the defense purposes. So increased production was also required from the industries. Hence, during the war, most of the European countries restored to mechanization of industries on scientific basis. And also rapid growth of industries in some countries during the war and reconstruction of industrial sector after the war in most countries increased the production at the fast pace. So this kind of overproduction became a new problem towards the end of 1920s. So, and also economic nationalism became a new feature of Europe after the First World War. Every country tried to become economically self-sufficient after the First World War. Each country wanted to reduce imports and increase exports. Highly industrial countries like United States of America, Britain found it difficult to find markets for their products. So their factories were closed down and workers become unemployed. As a result, international trade and commerce become stagnant. So at that time, the Great Depression had humbled even the greatest financial powers of the world. So 5,000 American banks were closed in 3 years. America stopped lending money abroad and began withdrawing short-term loans. So these measures pulled down the foundations of European recovery, especially in Germany and Austria. The biggest and most reputable bank of Austria, Credit Anhalt, and bankrupt, shaking the whole of the Europe. So all foreign capital was withdrawn from Germany. So the situation was so serious that President Hoover of the United States of America had to come with a proposal on June 20, 1931, that is called as Hoover Moratorium. This offer come to be known as the Hoover Moratorium. Hoover's offers was widely welcomed, and if it is immediately accepted by major powers, by psychological impact could have brought about recovery of the world economy. But France created problems. She was keen to receive reparation payments, as the amount that she was to receive from Germany was much more than the debt repayment to be made by her to the United States. So further, France feared that the measure was initial step to cancel all reparations from the Germany. That's why France was opposed to the proposal. So, however, Hoover had made it clear that he did not approve in any remote sense of cancellation of the debts to the United States. So, the Hoover Moratorium became effective on July 1, 1931. All international debt and reparation payments were suspended for 1 year. So the main points of Hoover moratorium were all intergovernmental payments were suspended for 1 year, and the postponed dues were to be paid in 10 installments commencing after the moratorium. And also, assistance was to be given to smaller countries who would be adversely affected due to suspension by major banks in other countries through the Bank of International Settlements. And also, assurance was given by Germany that the money saved due to moratorium would be used only for economic purpose, not for military and defense purpose. So the acceptance of Hoover moratorium brought to immediate relief to the countries. So this type of situations made countries to grow economically in normal times. So at the conference at that time, these countries accepted this Hoover moratorium, and some types of refusals made by the United States of America, like to cancel the war debts, and the decisions of the Lausanne Conference was automatically nullified, and Germany was neither in a position nor willing to pay anything. The reparation payments automatically came to an end. So the debtor nations of the USA also on similar grounds refused to pay full payments, although they agreed to make token payments. Subsequently, even those token payments were also stopped due to this Hoover moratorium. So if we discuss about the consequences of the economic depressions, there are many areas like political, economic consequences also happened. After the establishment of the League of Nations, the principal victim of this crisis is the League of Nations. France and Britain were the main world leaders at that time. They were so much weakened that they were unable to stand by the League of Nations. They failed to provide collective security to the victims of aggression. The United States of America, isolationism further destroyed their capacity to defend the weaker nations. So at that time, many situations happened, like Japan's aggression over Manchuria in 1931 was the first major shock to the League of Nations in its 12 years history. In fact, Japan's defiance of the League of Nations marked the beginning of the dissolution of that international body. Later, Italian invasion of Ethiopia happened in 1935, and the German action in Austria in the same year, 1935, were hardly resisted by the League of Nations. Japan and Italy withdrew from the League. Germany had already done so. League of Nations became a liability. It was unable to provide security and unable to maintain international peace between the member states. So some types of multinational, multi-dimensional crisis in different countries during this time. More than this, the crisis in economic life led to the crisis in morals and psychology. In the post-1934 war period, all faith in values and rights that impaired the world after the war were shaken and broken. The economic crisis and the rise of fascist dictatorship together altered the destiny of Europe. So United States of America was the worst hit by the depression. For example, agriculture had received a severe setback, and the steel industry worked only at 1/10 of its capacity. And Great Britain, France, Germany, Austria, Soviet Russia, Italy, and other parts of the world also faced this depression, had its effects outside the Europe too. So many conferences, many international conferences happened to solve this economic depression. Majority of the decisions taken by the League of Nations and other international conferences to be recovered from this economic depression from all the nations. So after this crisis, many nations has been free from their debts and payments and debts for the victorious nations. So this is the interwar developments, and also we have the syllabus of this international institution about League of Nations. This League of Nations is one of the important and most prominent international institution during the between the time of First World War and Second World War. By the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, because of the frequent wars and the discovery of more destructive weapons, the statesmen and the intellectuals all over the world were very much concerned about the establishment of an international organization to avoid war and to protect and to maintain international peace between the nations. So further, during the First World War, the peoples of all over the world and particularly of Europe faced untold distress and terrible massacre of human souls, large-scale destruction of private and national properties, and the horror of deadly scientific weapons left an indelible impression upon their minds. As a result, the people everywhere became eager and eager for peace and interstate cooperation. As a matter of fact, even before the war, many proposals were made for international cooperation to establish peace, but these efforts were stimulated with the outbreak of the First World War. So if we discuss about the genesis of the League of Nations, many conferences, many meetings happened to establish, to stop the war and to maintain and to establish international peace between all the nations all over the world. So in 1911, Sir Edward Grey emphasized the need for establishing some sort of committee or concern of nations. So in Versailles Treaty, however, the establishment of an international organization received special impetus when President Woodrow Wilson's 14-point principles emphasized that a general association of nations must be formed under specific covenants for the purpose of affording mutual guarantees of political independence and territorial integrity to great and small states alike. So, to consider the proposal made by Woodrow Wilson, the Paris Peace Conference set up a commission under his chairmanship. So, the commission consisted of 19 members. In February 1919, the commission prepared the draft of the covenant and a constitution. After certain minor amendments, Treaty of Versailles on June 28th of 1919, the covenant actually came into force on January 10, 1920. After obtaining the ratification of the requisite number of states, there were 26 articles in the League of Covenant, and its headquarters was located in Geneva in Switzerland. So then the League of Nations started its functioning. So this League of Nations primary objective is to stop the war between any member state and to maintain international peace between the member states. So the League of Nations was an international organization, and also the League of Nations wrote to promote international cooperation and preserve global peace. So the League achieved some success, but it ultimately was unable to prevent the even deadlier Second World War. The League of Nations was predecessor to today's more effective United Nations. If we discuss about the aims and goals of the this organization, World War I which was happened in 1914 to 1918, had caused the deaths of at least 10 millions of soldiers and millions of civilians. The elite victors of the war wanted to form an international organization that would prevent another horrific war. American President Woodrow Wilson was especially instrumental in formulating and advocating the idea of this League of Nations. So this league arbitrated disputes between member countries in order to peacefully preserve sovereignty and territorial rights. And also, the league encouraged countries to reduce their amount of military weapons. Any country that resorted to war would be subject to economic sanctions such as a halt to trade. And also, if we discuss about this member states of League of Nations, the League of Nations was founded in 1920 by 42 member states. As its height in 1934 to 1935, the League had 58 member states. The member countries of the League of Nations spanned the globe and included most of Southeast Asia, Europe, and South America. At the time of League of Nations, nearly all of Africa consisted colonies of Western powers. The United States never joined this League of Nations because the largely isolationist Senate refused to ratify the League's charter. So the official languages of the League of Nations were English, French, and Spanish. If we discuss about the administrational structure, the League of Nations was administered by three main bodies. One was the Assembly, composed of representatives from all member states, meet annually and discuss the priorities and budget of the organization. And the second one is the Council was composed of 4 permanent members, that is Great Britain, France, Italy, and Japan, and several non-permanent members who were elected by the permanent members every 3 years. And the third one is the Secretariat, led by Secretary General, monitored many of the humanitarian agencies, like many organizations also there for to support this organization. If we discuss about the political success of this League of Nations, the League of Nations was successful in preventing small wars. The League negotiated settlements to territorial disputes between Sweden and in Finland, Poland and Lithuania, and Greece and Bulgaria. The League of Nations also successfully administered in the former colonies of Germany and Ottoman Empire, including Syria, Nauru, and Togoland, until they were ready for independence. And also, there was a humanitarian success also there for this institution. The League of Nations was one of the world's first humanitarian organizations. So the League created and directed several agencies that were meant to improve the living conditions of the world's people. The League aided refugees. The League tried to end slavery and the drug trade, and it wanted to set standards on working conditions, and also it is constructed better transportation and communication network between nations. And also the League of Nations gave financial assistance and advice to some member countries, and also it is administered the Permanent Court of International Justice. Now we will call it as International Court of Justice. And also the League of Nations tried to prevent malnutrition and diseases such as leprosy and malaria. Today, that institution renamed and functioning as World Health Organization. And also the League of Nations promoted culture preservation and scientific advancement. Now we will call it as UNESCO. And also there are several failures also there for this organization in functioning. There are some political failures also there because of there is no such administration staff for these functions of this League of Nations. So the League of Nations was unable to enforce many of its regulations because of it did not have a separate military staff. So the League did not stop several of the most significant events that led to World War II. Examples of League of Nations failures include one is in the time of 1935, the invasion of Ethiopia by Italy, the annexation of Sudetenland and Austria by Germany, and invasion of Manchuria, the northeastern Chinese province, by Japan in 1932, and the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, withdrew from the League of Nations because they refused to comply with the League's order to not militarize. And also, the members of League of Nations knew that many changes within the organization had to occur after the World War II. The League of Nations was disbanded in 1946 and improved international organization. The United States Nations Organization was carefully discussed and formed based on many of the political and social goals of the League of Nations. Many lessons learned from this League of Nations had the diplomatic, the compassionate goal of generating permanent international stability. But the organization was unable to avert conflicts which would ultimately change human history. Thankfully, the world's leader realized the League's shortcomings and reinforced its objectives in the modern day successful United Nations organization. But even now, United Nations organizations also dominated from some developed nations, and the United Nations organization is not actively and not independently, decisions are not taken by the United Nations organization. So many situations, many international events happened. The primary aim and primary objectives of League of Nations is, the chief aim is to promote international cooperation and to achieve international peace and security. So if we discuss about in detail the causes for the failure of the League of Nations, many political situations and many colonial incidents also happened to failure of this League of Nations. So this league was incorporated in the peace treaties. It was a political blunder that the covenant of the League of Nations was made a part and parcel of the peace treaties. As a result, those states that refused to ratify the treaties were automatically debarred from the membership of League. These nations violated the League along with the peace treaties. And also, there is a lack of understanding of League ideals. The member nations of League have no clear idea about the ideals and objectives of the League. Hence, the different nations used by League for the furtherance of their own ends. And also, there is a lack of cooperation of big powers to functioning in this functioning of League of Nations, as the USA did not join it and the Russia and Germany were not admitted into it for a long time. The League from the very beginning would not emerge as a universal organization. Several nations also withdrew at intervals from various regions. Further, big powers used the League as an instrument to safeguard their national interests. So this certainly undermined the basis of the League. And also there is a effective voting system also there. The voting system in the League of Nations Assembly and the Council was highly defective. The principle of unanimous agreement created troubles in the matter of taking decisions in the League. Without unanimity among its members, it was impossible for the league to take any resolution on any issue, and also lack of power to execute its own decisions. So the league had no precise power to execute its own decisions. It was not provided with any independent force to effectively deal with the states threatening the peace and security of the world. Its weakness was clearly demonstrated when Japan and Italy invaded Manchuria and Abyssinia, respectively. And also, there is revengeful attitude of the vanquished states, suspicious nature of the victors about the defeated states, and the revengeful attitude of Germany created obstacles in the way of proper execution of League of Nations responsibilities. And also, there is a lack of international spirit. Narrow nationalism of the states was another factor for the failure of this League of Nations. No member of the League of Nations was prepared to undermine its own national interest for the sake of greater international interest. Even some members of the League of Nations did not hesitate to violate the League of Nations principles for the sake of their narrow and national interest. And also, the League of Nations failed in the implementation of disarmament. The failure in achieving disarmament is one of the important reason for the failure of League of Nations. So the League also could not succeed in realizing the principle of disarmament due to the structural and operational defects associated with the League of Nations. Germany got encouraged to return itself in total disregard to the Treaty of Versailles. A verbal protest registered by the League of Nations against Germany was of no avail. And also, the spirit of nationalism that prevailed during the interwar period was another factor that contributed to the failure of the League of Nations. The economic depression of 1929 to 31 was so severe that the political economic system began to collapse everywhere. So the counteract the evils of depression, every state, including the big states, began to take all possible steps to protect their national interests. So every state began a tariff war and the international trade shrank to alarming levels. So the economic crisis led to the rise of fascism in Italy, Nazism in Germany, and authoritarianism in Japan. These states began to pursue a policy of aggression, not only for markets, but also for raw materials. And these states began to, this situation gradually led to the failure of League of Nations and to the outbreak of the Second World War. In spite of these shortcomings, the League of Nations was no doubt a great experiment, though it has failed to ensure peace and security in the international scenario. It did not. It did an excellent work in social, economic, and humanitarian fields. So, anyway, various factors contributed for this failure of the League of Nations, but it has succeeded in some political and other war meetings. So it has played a vital role in dispute management, like many international disputes. The League of Nations involved and had a partial success. It forced Greece to pay compensation to Bulgaria when the former invaded the latter, but none of these disputes threatened the world peace. So, and also it has succeeded in some social and humanitarian conditions, like it has a successful history for the establishment of International Labour Organization, was the most successful institution for the this League of Nations. And the goals of International Labour Organization also include fixing maximum working days and minimum wages, ensuring that member states provide for unemployment benefits and old age pensions. And also, it is established a refugee organization. It helped the prisoners of war in Russia to their homes outside Russia. In 1933, it helped the Jews who were fleeing to escape Nazi persecution to resettled in different countries where they would be safe. And also, World Health Organization established due to this time, it did not uh, 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 participated, but it is the primary organization for the people's health conditions in all the world. It did good work in finding causes of different epidemics. It was especially successful in combating the typhus epidemic in Russia, which had the potential spread to the rest of the Europe. And also, it mandates a commission. It had the responsibility of monitoring the governance of territories given to member nations as mandates. So, in some cases, the League of Nations failed because of it has lack of military force, lack of administration staff, and lack of financial powers to maintain these organizations. So the League of Nations was a truly not a truly representative organization. It had a limited membership because of USA did not join in it, and this resulted the lack of funds for the league's work. So it was also made to defend an imperfect treaty which suffered from biases and was prone to be broken. The peace treaties signed were against the principle of self-determination. For instance, millions of Germans resided outside Germany in Czechoslovakia and Poland after the peace treaties. Similarly, many Turks were now residents of Greece. It was only Germany which was made to disarm under the Treaty of Versailles. The League failed to convince other major powers to disarm. So Hitler used this an excuse to quit the World Disarmament Conference. Soon he denounced the League of Nations and made Germany quit it as well. So all the imperfections of League were responsible for the occurrence of the Second Major World War. But the diplomatic philosophy behind this league represented a fundamental shift from the preceding 100 years. So the league lacked its armed forces and defended the victorious First World War allies. So the great powers were often reluctant to do so. So during the Second Italo-Ethiopian War, when the League accused Italian soldiers to targeting the International Red Cross, Benito Mussolini responded that the League is very good when sparrows shout, but no good at all for eagles fall out. So, after some notable successes and some early failures in the 1920s, the League ultimately proved incapable of preventing aggression by the Axis powers in the 1930s. So the credibility of the organization was weakened by the fact that the United States never joined the League, and the Soviet Union joined late, was soon expelled after invading Finland. So the Germany withdrew from the league, as did Japan, Italy, Spain, and others. So the onset of World War II showed that the league had failed its primary purpose. So it was inactive until the abolition. The league lasted for 26 years. The United Nations Organization replaced it in 1946 and inherited several agencies and organizations founded by the league. So here we have I am concluding the session. Thank you for the participation. Tomorrow we will meet at 10:30 a.m. Thank you, Ananda.